The hate army troll.
It's the hate army, bro.
The hate army, that guy.
Hate army.
Hate army general. Good vibes to the hate army.
Shout out to hate.
Shout out for hate. Shout out for hate.
Bike ride then.
Bike ride. You want to go on a fucking bike ride? Fine, fine, let's go on a fucking bike ride.
What's funny is this
We'll take
this
a bike
actually
ride
resonates
along
with
this
me.
beachy beach, and I'll show you just what you want to see.
Go to the bike rental stand. This resonates with me, and here's why this resonates with me. When I was growing up,
It was going so well until
when I was growing up, my dad and I had a lot of time we spent together when I was younger. So we would go for walks. We would go to the local elementary school, and they had an open playground. You just walk onto it, and we would play like with balls, bounce them off a wall, and chase, play catch, and stuff like that. Every summer, when it was warm, we played badminton in our driveway. I got really good at it. You know, they call it birdie or badminton. You know, the sport. Stuff like that. But then as I started to get older, I started kind of hanging out with my friends, and I started playing a lot of video games, right? And I started getting into things like comic books and shit like that. My dad was into none of that. Like, literally none of it at all. So for him, once I started getting into different things like that, he kind of disconnected, you know? Now, I'm not saying that he wasn't there. I'm not saying he wasn't supportive. Absolutely. But, you know, like, he just didn't get me. I felt like I was very different from my dad, because I guess he was into other things and stuff. And every once in a while, we would go fishing together, and I loved it. Really.
After that boat stunt.
What's the big deal? If anything goes
I'm
wrong,
going to tell the
you
story
can
about their
just
gabbing.
fake your death and start all over. How am I
Jimmy.
meant to develop my own moral sensibilities when yours are so unbelievably fuck-based? God help the morally bankrupt planet your generation have left us.
Nah.
You're the good guy.
Yeah. Anyway, that's...
Which he won't. So anyway, the story that I was going to tell you is, as I started getting to more, I mean, back then, let's be honest, they would have been called nerdy things. Today, they're probably not. Today, comic books, superheroes, video games are not considered nerdy at all. Back then, they were. If you were into that stuff in the 80s and 90s, you were a nerd. People would have, oh, you nerd, you're into that shit. Today, it's like mainstream pop culture stuff. Everyone's into it, right? Times have definitely changed. But as I was getting into that, my dad was not into that stuff. He was into, you know, more jock stuff, you know, sports and shit like that. So I would do stuff with my dad, but it would be time to time, and then the older I got, the more infrequent it was. So what ended up happening was he would start taking me to arcades once a week, or twice a week, and he would hang out in the arcade because I was young, you know, I was just a young teenager or whatever. He didn't want to leave me there alone with a bunch of strangers. So basically he would kind of hang out at the arcades and stuff when I started to go, but eventually we just had this disconnect, right? We just did, because I'm into games, I'm into comics, I'm into all this stuff, and he's totally not interested in any of that. I mean, the most video games I ever played with my dad was the Atari 7800. So we're talking the second half of the 1980s. He would come home from work, and we would sit down and play video games for like 30, 40 minutes before dinner was ready. And, you know, we played various games. Karateka, Moon Patrol, Dig Dug, Ball Blazer. I keep going. I probably played like 10 different games over the years. But after that, I couldn't even tell you one time he touched an NES controller. I couldn't tell you a single moment he really cared or watched me play Super Nintendo or talked to me about superheroes. And these were the things that I was like really into. You know what I mean? So it's just a weird disconnect. And it's funny because it sounds to me that's what's happening here between Michael and his son. There's this generational disconnect where Michael in his past was into all these other things. He doesn't know how to relate to his son. His son is a completely different generation, a digital generation, sitting in his bedroom playing video games. Now, the thing with his son is his son's like basically a schlub. I was not a schlub. I had a job at the age of 15. Before I was even supposed to legally have one, I had a job. Because I had motivation. I had like that attitude to go out there and do things with my life. I didn't want to just sit around doing nothing, playing games all day. So, definitely not to that extent. But I could totally understand the feeling of having a disconnect with your dad and being of different generations and not really understanding each other that well, only because there really is that gap of culture. That's what I feel what it was. I was into nerdy culture things. My dad was into completely different things. I bet if I was totally into sports and shit, he probably would have had a much closer connection. So it's funny. Double M says, so Michael's having a midlife crisis. Any tips for that? The thing is, like, I feel like my life is better today than it ever was. When I was younger, I feel like my life was worse and rougher. I like my life today better than when I was younger. I really genuinely do. So it's kind of hard to have a crisis when you're feeling that good. But recently people have said to me, why don't you change your appearance? We're tired of seeing you look the same that you have for the past 15 years. So I actually, just incidentally, in the last few weeks, kind of changed my looks a little bit around, you know. People seem to like it, so.
I'm a dancer, yeah.
Oh my god.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Dabian says she's 22. I mean, if she's 22, she's still living in his house. Like, it seems to be, here's the real problem, right? Until the game begins, it seems like he was a passive dad. He wasn't doing anything to involve himself in his lives of his kids. He was just sitting around like a lump. And because of that, his kids got out of hand. Now, all of a sudden, he wants to take charge, but they're already adults set in their ways, and their ways are destructive and fucked up. So now he's like, oh, I'm going to stop that. Well, you should have done that when they were kids. You should have taught them the way to behave and be mature when they were kids, and then maybe they wouldn't be like this as adults, you know what I mean? But he fucked up his opportunity, and now it's like a little too late. They're already in their 20s. You're right. They can do whatever they want. They're adults. They have the right to do it. And I mean, the only thing he can do is say, listen, I'm going to cut you off, throw you out if you're going to behave this way because it's not the way I want my kids to behave. And he has the right to do that, too. I mean, it's kind of fucked up, especially if they don't have anywhere else to go. I mean, Jimmy has no fucking job. I don't know about the girl. I don't know her name. But, I think that's the plot of the game. That's the whole point, is that things are falling apart in his life because he's been such a laid-back, absentee asshole, right? And that's why, you know, now all of a sudden, it all comes back to, like, explode in his face. His wife's cheating on him. He lashes out because of that. Gets him into big trouble, and now he's stuck in all these capers and everything, right? We did a super chat says, do you ever ask your parents for a sibling? That way you could have someone to play with, etc. No, as I told you guys when I was growing up, I had an older cousin who lived with me who was kind of like my older sister for a long time. So it kind of like I had a sister even though I didn't. It kind of felt that way. But, I mean, did we ever play and stuff? We were very young, yeah, but after that, no. Like, she was older than me. So she got into teenage stuff and everything way before I ever did. So.
Money, money, yeah, yeah. Money, money. Money, money, yeah, yeah. Money, money. Oh, money, money, yeah, yeah. These contributions are mandatory.
Tipping me helps me more than anything.